sometimes the most powerful moments happen in complete silence. Picture this: thousands of people gathered for a ceremonial event, cameras rolling, dignitaries watching, and, in that sea of perfection, one man struggles with something as simple as standing up. What happens next will restore your faith in humanity and show you that true honor isn't found in medals or titles, but in the quiet moments when someone chooses compassion over protocol. This is the story of how a single act of kindness between strangers became a symbol of what it truly means to serve others. It's about dignity, respect, and the unbreakable bond that connects those who understand sacrifice. But, most importantly, it's about how one Royal Guard's decision to break protocol changed not just one Veterans Day, but touched millions of hearts around the world. Get ready for a story that will remind you why small acts of humanity can create the biggest impact of all. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parade ground as hundreds of people began gathering for the annual Veterans Recognition Ceremony. The air was crisp with autumn's bite, and the smell of fallen leaves mixed with the distant aroma of coffee from nearby vendors. This wasn't just any ordinary day at the military installation. Today would honor those who had given years of their lives in service to their country. Among the crowd, families clutched small flags and photos of their loved ones. Children fidgeted in their best clothes while parents straightened ties and smoothed hair. Everyone seemed to understand the importance of the moment. The ceremony had been planned for months, with every detail carefully arranged to show proper respect for the veterans being honored. Standing at attention near the main platform was Sergeant Marcus Wellington, a member of the Royal Guard who had been selected for this special duty. His uniform was immaculate, every button polished to perfection, his posture straight as an arrow. Marcus had served in the Royal Guard for 8 years, and he took tremendous pride in his role. He understood that his presence at events like this represented something greater than himself. He was there to honor tradition, to show respect, and to maintain the dignity that such occasions demanded. Marcus had grown up hearing stories about veterans from his grandfather, who had served in World War II. His grandfather would sit on the front porch on summer evenings, sharing tales that painted pictures of brotherhood, sacrifice, and the bonds formed between soldiers. These stories had shaped Marcus's understanding of military service and influenced his decision to join the Royal Guard. He saw his role as continuing a tradition of honor that stretched back generations. As the ceremony preparations continued around him, Marcus noticed the crowd growing larger. Veterans of all ages were arriving, some walking with canes, others in wheelchairs, many wearing their old military jackets with faded patches and ribbons. Each face told a story of service, of time spent far from home, of challenges faced and overcome. Marcus felt a deep respect for these men and women who had given so much. The organizing committee had worked hard to ensure every veteran would be properly recognized. Names were checked against lists, seating arrangements were confirmed, and special accommodations were made for those who needed them. Volunteers wearing bright yellow vests guided people to their seats and handed out programs. The atmosphere was both festive and solemn, celebrating service while acknowledging the sacrifices that had been made. Marcus watched as a group of elderly veterans slowly made their way toward the seating area. These were men who had served during some of the most challenging periods in military history. Their movements were careful and deliberate, but their spirits seemed strong. They talked quietly among themselves, sharing memories and catching up on news about old friends. Despite their age, there was something unmistakably military about their bearing. The ceremony's organizers had planned every moment with precision. There would be speeches from military leaders and local officials, the presentation of awards and recognitions, and a special tribute to fallen comrades. A military band had been practicing for weeks to ensure their performance would be perfect. Everything had been designed to create a meaningful experience that would honor the veterans' service while bringing the community together. As more people arrived, Marcus began to notice individual stories unfolding in the crowd. A young woman helped her elderly father navigate through the gathering, his Purple Heart visible on his jacket. A group of middle-aged men greeted each other with the kind of enthusiasm that comes from shared experiences and long friendships. Children asked their grandparents questions about the medals they wore, receiving patient explanations about different campaigns and conflicts. The weather was cooperating beautifully. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, warming the air and creating perfect conditions for the outdoor ceremony. A gentle breeze stirred the flags that had been placed around the venue, creating a patriotic backdrop for the day's events. The setting seemed almost designed to enhance the significance of what was about to take place. Marcus could see the ceremony officials making their final preparations. The podium had been tested for sound, the microphones had been checked, and the schedule had been reviewed one more time. Military protocol demanded that everything proceed smoothly and on time. Any disruption or delay would be seen as disrespectful to the veterans being honored and to the families who had come to support them. Standing at his assigned position, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility that came with his uniform. He was representing not just himself, but the entire Royal Guard and the traditions they upheld. His presence was meant to show respect for the veterans and to demonstrate the military's commitment to honoring those who had served. He took this responsibility seriously and was determined to fulfill his duties with the dignity and professionalism expected of his position. The crowd continued to grow, and Marcus estimated that several hundred people would be attending the ceremony. This was exactly what the organizers had hoped for. Community support was an important part of honoring veterans, and the strong turnout showed that people understood the significance of recognizing military service. The presence of so many civilians, especially families with children, helped bridge the gap between military and civilian communities. As the official start time approached, Marcus could feel the anticipation building in the crowd. Conversations became quieter, and people began moving toward their assigned seating areas. The ceremony was about to begin, and everyone seemed to understand that they were about to participate in something meaningful and important. The military band took their positions, instruments gleaming in the morning sun. Their conductor reviewed the program one final time, ensuring that every piece would be performed exactly as rehearsed. Music would play an important role in setting the tone for the ceremony, helping to create the atmosphere of respect and gratitude that the occasion demanded. Marcus straightened his already perfect posture and prepared for the ceremony to begin. He had participated in many official events during his time with the Royal Guard, but each one felt significant. Today was special because it focused entirely on honoring those who had served their country. As he stood ready to fulfill his ceremonial duties, Marcus felt proud to be part of an event that celebrated the courage and dedication of military veterans. The morning sun continued to shine down on the gathering crowd, and everything seemed perfectly arranged for a meaningful and memorable ceremony. In just a few minutes, the formal proceedings would begin, and Marcus would play his part in honoring the brave men and women who had answered their country's call to serve. What he didn't know was that this day would present him with an opportunity to demonstrate that true honor sometimes requires setting aside protocol in favor of basic human compassion. The ceremony began precisely at 10 o'clock with the crisp notes of the national anthem echoing across the parade ground. The military band performed flawlessly, their music creating a stirring backdrop as hundreds of people stood with hands over hearts, many singing along with voices filled with emotion. Marcus maintained his position of attention, his trained eyes scanning the crowd while remaining focused on his ceremonial duties. As the anthem concluded and people began to take their seats, Marcus noticed movement in his peripheral vision. About 30 feet away, in the section reserved for honored veterans, an elderly man was struggling. The man appeared to be in his 80s, wearing a faded military jacket decorated with service ribbons and campaign medals that spoke of decades of distinguished service. His hands gripped the arms of his chair as he attempted to stand for what appeared to be another ceremonial moment. The struggle was subtle at first. The veteran's legs trembled as he tried to support his weight, and his breathing became labored with the effort. His weathered face showed determination mixed with frustration as his body refused to cooperate with his intentions. This was clearly a man who had once been strong and capable, but age and perhaps old injuries had taken their toll on his physical abilities. Marcus watched as the veteran made several attempts to rise from his chair. Each effort seemed to require enormous strength, and each failure brought a flash of what looked like embarrassment across the man's face. The people sitting nearby didn't seem to notice the struggle, focused as they were on the ceremony proceedings. The veteran was suffering in silence, too proud to ask for help, but clearly unable to accomplish what he desperately wanted to do. During his military career, this veteran had undoubtedly faced challenges that would have broken lesser men. The ribbons on his jacket told stories of campaigns in distant lands, of battles fought and won, of years spent serving his country with honor and distinction. Now, in what should have been a moment of recognition and celebration, he was fighting a different kind of battle against his own physical limitations. Marcus understood military pride. He knew that veterans of this generation had been raised to be self-reliant, to handle their problems without complaint, and to maintain their dignity no matter what circumstances they faced. Asking for help would be difficult for any veteran, but, for someone of this man's generation, it would feel like admitting defeat. The internal struggle was probably as painful as the physical one. The ceremony continued around them. The master of ceremonies had taken the podium and was beginning his opening remarks about the importance of honoring military service. His words spoke of sacrifice, dedication, and the debt of gratitude that society owed to those who had served. The irony was not lost on Marcus that while these noble sentiments were being expressed, one of the honored veterans was struggling alone just a few yards away. Marcus found himself facing a dilemma that had not been covered in any training manual. His orders were clear about maintaining his position and following ceremonial protocol. Royal guards were expected to remain at attention during formal events, serving as living symbols of military tradition and discipline. Moving from his assigned position without orders would be a breach of protocol that could result in serious consequences for his military career. Yet everything he had learned about military values told him that helping a fellow service member should take priority over following rules. The motto of his unit emphasized service before self, and watching an elderly veteran struggle while he remained motionless felt wrong on a fundamental level. Marcus began to wrestle with the conflict between his duty to follow orders and his instinct to help someone in need. The veteran made another attempt to stand, this time gripping the chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His legs shook with the effort, and, for a moment it seemed like he might succeed. But his strength failed him again, and he sank back into the chair with a look of defeat that was painful to witness. The man's shoulders sagged, and Marcus could see that the repeated failures were taking an emotional toll as well as a physical one. Marcus glanced around to see if anyone else had noticed the veteran's plight. The ceremony organizers were focused on their duties, family members were watching the proceedings on the platform, and other veterans seemed absorbed in the speeches. It appeared that Marcus was the only one who had observed the struggle taking place. This realization made his dilemma even more acute, as it meant that if he didn't act, no one else was likely to help. The speeches continued, with each speaker emphasizing themes of honor, courage, and the importance of supporting veterans. These words created a stark contrast to what Marcus was witnessing. Here were officials talking about supporting veterans while one of them struggled alone in the audience. The situation highlighted the difference between ceremonial recognition and practical assistance, between words and actions. Marcus thought about his grandfather's stories of military brotherhood. He remembered tales of soldiers looking out for each other, of bonds forged in difficult circumstances, and of the unwritten code that said no one gets left behind. These values seemed more important than any ceremonial protocol, especially when applied to helping an elderly veteran who had already given so much in service to his country. The veteran tried once more to stand, and this time Marcus could see tears of frustration beginning to form in the man's eyes. This proud warrior was being defeated not by an enemy, but by his own body's limitations. The sight was heartbreaking and made Marcus's decision feel more urgent. Every moment of hesitation meant more suffering for someone who deserved better. Marcus began to shift his weight slightly, testing whether anyone would notice if he moved from his position. His movement was so subtle that it would be difficult for casual observers to detect, but he was gathering himself for what he knew needed to happen. The conflict between duty and compassion was reaching a breaking point, and Marcus could feel himself leaning toward action. The ceremony's formal tone continued, but Marcus was no longer fully focused on the proceedings. His attention had shifted entirely to the struggling veteran, and he found himself mentally preparing for the consequences of whatever decision he made. Breaking protocol during a formal ceremony could result in disciplinary action, but allowing a veteran to suffer when he could help felt like a betrayal of everything the military stood for. As he watched the elderly man gather himself for yet another attempt to stand, Marcus made his decision. Military training had taught him many things, but the most important lesson was about service to others. This was a moment that called for action, not adherence to ceremonial rules. The veteran's dignity and well-being were more important than protocol, and Marcus knew that his grandfather would have expected nothing less than for him to help a fellow soldier in need. Marcus took a deep breath and prepared to step forward. He understood that what he was about to do would be noticed by his superiors and might have consequences for his career. But he also knew that some things were more important than following rules, especially when those rules prevented him from helping someone who had served with such distinction. The veteran's struggle was about to end, even if it meant that Marcus's might just be beginning. Without hesitation, Marcus stepped away from his ceremonial position and walked purposefully toward the struggling veteran. His polished boots moved silently across the ground as he approached, his mind focused entirely on the elderly man who continued to fight against his physical limitations. The decision had been made, and now Marcus was committed to seeing it through regardless of the consequences. As he drew closer, Marcus could see the veteran more clearly. The man's service jacket was worn but well-maintained, with creases that spoke of years of careful pressing and attention to military appearance standards. His gray hair was neatly combed, and, despite his current struggle, there was an unmistakable dignity about him that commanded respect. This was someone who had spent a lifetime serving others, and now it was Marcus's turn to serve him. The veteran noticed Marcus approaching and looked up with surprised eyes. There was a moment of uncertainty as the elderly man tried to understand why a royal guard was walking toward him during the middle of a formal ceremony. Marcus could see confusion mixed with hope in the veteran's expression, as if he couldn't quite believe that help might actually be coming. Marcus reached the veteran's chair and positioned himself slightly to the side, extending his arm in a gesture that was both respectful and supportive. He leaned down slightly and spoke in a quiet voice that only the veteran could hear. "May I assist you, sir?" The words were simple, but they carried the weight of one soldier offering help to another, creating an instant bond between two men separated by decades but united by their commitment to service. The veteran's eyes filled with gratitude as he looked up at Marcus. For a moment, he seemed overwhelmed by the kindness of the gesture and the respect that Marcus showed by asking permission rather than simply taking action. The elderly man nodded slowly and reached out to accept the offered assistance, his weathered hand gripping Marcus's strong arm with surprising firmness. With careful coordination, Marcus helped the veteran rise from his chair. The process was slow and deliberate, with Marcus providing just enough support to make the difference without making the elderly man feel helpless. Together, they worked as a team, the veteran using his remaining strength while Marcus supplied what was needed to complete the task. It was a perfect example of how assistance could be provided while preserving dignity. As the veteran stood tall, supported by Marcus's steady presence, something remarkable happened. The man's posture straightened, his shoulders squared, and his chin lifted with obvious pride. Despite his physical limitations, he was once again a soldier standing at attention, honoring the ceremony and his fellow veterans. The transformation was immediate and powerful, showing that with just a little help, the spirit of service could overcome physical challenges. The moment did not go unnoticed by others in the crowd. People sitting nearby began to realize what was happening, and word spread quietly through the gathering. Rather than focusing on the ceremony speakers, more and more people began watching the interaction between Marcus and the elderly veteran. There was something deeply moving about seeing one generation of military service helping another. Marcus maintained his position beside the veteran, ready to provide continued support if needed. He could feel the man's slight tremor as he worked to maintain his standing position, but there was also a determination that spoke to decades of military training and personal discipline. The veteran was drawing on reserves of strength that went beyond the physical, tapping into the pride and honor that had sustained him throughout his long career. The ceremony speakers continued with their prepared remarks, apparently unaware of the drama unfolding in the audience. Their words about military values and the importance of honoring veterans took on new meaning as people watched those very values being demonstrated in real time. Marcus's actions were providing a living example of what it truly meant to serve others and honor fellow service members. Standing together, Marcus and the veteran presented a powerful image. The young royal guard in his pristine uniform represented the current generation of military service, while the elderly veteran embodied decades of dedication and sacrifice. Their partnership bridged the gap between past and present, showing that the bonds formed through military service transcend age and circumstance. The veteran whispered something to Marcus, words that were too quiet for others to hear but clearly meaningful to both men. Marcus nodded in response, acknowledging whatever thanks or blessing had been offered. The brief exchange was private, a moment of connection between two soldiers that didn't need to be shared with the world to have profound significance. As the minutes passed, Marcus continued to provide steady support while the veteran remained standing. The elderly man's face showed the effort required to maintain his position, but there was also unmistakable satisfaction in his expression. He was participating in the ceremony as he had intended, honoring his fallen comrades and celebrating the service of his fellow veterans. The struggle that had seemed insurmountable just minutes earlier had been overcome through partnership and mutual respect. Other veterans in the area began to take notice of what was happening. Several nodded approvingly at Marcus, recognizing the young man's commitment to helping a fellow service member. Some made quiet comments to their companions, pointing out the example of military brotherhood being displayed before their eyes. The ripple effect of Marcus's actions was spreading throughout the veteran community. Family members in the crowd were also watching with deep emotion. Children pointed and asked their parents questions about why the soldier was helping the elderly man. Parents used the moment as a teaching opportunity, explaining about service, respect, and the importance of helping others when they need it most. The scene was creating memories that would last long beyond the formal ceremony. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility that came with his decision to break protocol. He knew that his actions were being observed by fellow service members, superior officers, and civilians alike. Every movement was being judged, every gesture analyzed. But he also felt the rightness of what he was doing, the certainty that came from acting in accordance with his deepest values and beliefs. The bond between Marcus and the veteran was strengthening with each passing moment. What had begun as a simple act of assistance was evolving into something deeper, a connection between two men who understood the meaning of service and sacrifice. They were writing a new chapter in the ongoing story of military brotherhood, one that would be remembered long after the formal speeches were forgotten. As the ceremony continued around them, Marcus and the elderly veteran stood together as living symbols of what it meant to serve others. Their partnership demonstrated that true honor wasn't found in following rules blindly, but in recognizing when human compassion should take precedence over protocol. They were showing everyone present what military values look like in action, creating a moment of authentic meaning in the midst of formal ceremony. Word of what was happening began to spread through the crowd like ripples in a still pond. People who had been focused on the formal proceedings started turning their attention to the remarkable scene unfolding in the veterans' seating section. Conversations became hushed whispers as the significance of Marcus's actions began to resonate with those who witnessed them. A photographer who had been assigned to document the ceremony noticed the interaction and began taking pictures. Through his camera lens, he captured the profound humanity of the moment, the strong young soldier supporting the elderly veteran, both men standing with obvious pride and mutual respect. The photographer understood immediately that he was witnessing something special, something that transcended the usual ceremonial photos and touched on deeper truths about service and brotherhood. The ceremony organizers gradually became aware that something unusual was happening in the audience. While they initially worried about disruption to their carefully planned program, they soon realized that what they were seeing actually enhanced the meaning of the event. Marcus's spontaneous act of kindness was demonstrating the very values that the ceremony was meant to celebrate, bringing authentic emotion to what might otherwise have been merely formal recognition. Among the crowd, other veterans began responding to what they were seeing. Men and women who had served in different conflicts and different eras found themselves united by the display of military brotherhood playing out before them. Some had tears in their eyes as they watched Marcus provide the assistance that any one of them might need someday. The scene reminded them of the bonds they had formed with their own comrades and the support they had given and received during their years of service. The elderly veteran continued to stand with Marcus's help, but his posture had transformed completely from the struggling figure he had been just minutes before. Now he stood tall and proud, his military bearing evident despite his physical limitations. The confidence that came from knowing he wasn't alone in his struggle had restored his dignity and allowed him to participate fully in the ceremony honoring his service. Marcus could feel the attention of the crowd, but his focus remained entirely on the veteran beside him. He adjusted his position slightly to provide better support while maintaining the respectful distance that preserved the elderly man's sense of independence. The balance between helping and hovering was delicate, and Marcus managed it with the sensitivity that comes from truly understanding what it means to serve others. A young mother sitting nearby used the moment to teach her children about kindness and respect. She pointed out how the soldier was helping the elderly man and explained that this was what good people do when they see someone who needs assistance. Her children watched with wide eyes, absorbing a lesson about compassion that they would carry with them throughout their lives. The ripple effects of Marcus's actions were already extending beyond the immediate moment. The formal speakers on the platform gradually became aware that the audience's attention had shifted. Rather than being offended by the distraction, they began to incorporate what was happening into their remarks. One speaker paused in his prepared text to acknowledge the example of military values being demonstrated in the crowd, using Marcus and the veteran as a real-time illustration of the principles he had been describing. Social media began buzzing as people in the crowd started sharing photos and videos of the interaction. The images spread quickly across various platforms, accompanied by comments about honor, respect, and the true meaning of military service. What had started as a private moment between two individuals was becoming a public symbol of how veterans should be treated and how military values should be lived out in daily life. The veterans' family members, who had been watching from a different section of the crowd, made their way over to see what was happening. When they arrived and saw Marcus supporting their loved one, their gratitude was overwhelming. The elderly man's daughter thanked Marcus through tears, explaining that her father had been determined to stand for the ceremony despite his recent health challenges. Marcus's assistance had made it possible for the veteran to participate with the dignity he deserved. Other Royal Guard members who were stationed around the ceremony perimeter took notice of Marcus's actions. While they remained at their assigned positions, there was obvious approval in their expressions. They understood the choice Marcus had made and the potential consequences he might face for breaking protocol. Their silent support provided additional validation that he had done the right thing, even if it meant risking his military career. The bond between Marcus and the elderly veteran deepened as they continued standing together. What had begun as a practical matter of providing physical support had evolved into a meaningful connection between two generations of military service. They were representing something larger than themselves, embodying the continuity of values that connected all those who had chosen to serve their country. The ceremony's musical interludes took on new significance as Marcus and the veteran stood together. When the band played traditional military songs, both men stood even straighter, clearly moved by the familiar melodies that had soundtracked to their years of service. The music created an emotional backdrop for their partnership, reinforcing the shared experiences that bound them together despite the decades between their service periods. Local news reporters who were covering the ceremony began focusing their cameras on Marcus and the veteran. They recognized that this spontaneous display of compassion was more newsworthy than any of the planned speeches or presentations. The story was writing itself in real time, creating exactly the kind of human interest content that would resonate with viewers and readers far beyond the local community. The impact on other attendees was visible throughout the crowd. Veterans were nodding approvingly, civilians were wiping away tears, and children were asking questions that led to important conversations about service and sacrifice. Marcus's simple act of helping had created a teaching moment that was reaching hundreds of people simultaneously, multiplying the positive effects of his decision to break protocol. As the ceremony continued, it became clear that the most meaningful moment of the day was not happening on the official platform, but in the audience where two soldiers were demonstrating the values that make military service noble. Their partnership was overshadowing the formal proceedings, creating a more authentic and powerful statement about honor and brotherhood than any prepared speech could deliver. The elderly veteran whispered something else to Marcus, and this time several people nearby could hear the words "Thank you, son." The simple phrase carried enormous weight, acknowledging not just the physical assistance but the respect and dignity with which it had been provided. For Marcus, hearing those words from a fellow veteran made any potential consequences of his actions worthwhile. He had honored the legacy of service that connected him to generations of military members who had come before him. As the ceremony entered its final phase, something extraordinary was happening throughout the crowd. What had begun as Marcus helping one struggling veteran had evolved into a powerful demonstration of community support and mutual respect. The ripple effects of his compassionate action were creating waves of positive emotion that touched every person present, transforming an already meaningful event into something truly unforgettable. The ceremony organizers made an unexpected decision. Rather than continuing with their prepared program exactly as planned, they chose to acknowledge what everyone was witnessing. The master of ceremonies called attention to Marcus and the elderly veteran, using their partnership as an example of the military values being celebrated that day. The recognition was spontaneous and heartfelt, showing that sometimes the most important moments are those that happen naturally rather than those that are carefully scripted. The crowd responded with sustained applause that went on for several minutes. The ovation was not just for Marcus's actions, but for what his assistance represented about military brotherhood and the responsibility to care for fellow veterans. People stood throughout the gathering, many wiping tears from their eyes as they celebrated the display of compassion they had witnessed. The applause seemed to energize the elderly veteran, who stood even straighter as he acknowledged the recognition. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the response but remained focused on his primary responsibility, ensuring that the veteran beside him was comfortable and supported. Even as cameras flashed and attention centered on their interaction, Marcus maintained the respectful professionalism that had characterized his assistance from the beginning. His humility in the face of recognition demonstrated the genuine nature of his motivations and reinforced the positive impression he had created. The elderly veteran's family gathered around them, creating a circle of support that included multiple generations. His grandchildren, who had heard stories about their grandfather's military service but had never fully understood its significance, now saw him standing proud and tall with the help of a young soldier. The moment provided a tangible connection between past and present, helping the children understand the continuing relevance of their grandfather's service and the bonds that unite military families. Other veterans in the crowd began approaching Marcus and the elderly man, creating an impromptu receiving line of respect and gratitude. Each veteran who stopped to shake hands or offer words of appreciation added to the emotional impact of the moment. These interactions highlighted the fact that Marcus's actions had resonated throughout the entire veteran community, not just with the one man he had directly helped. The photographer who had been documenting the interaction throughout the ceremony approached and asked for permission to take a formal portrait of Marcus and the veteran together. The resulting image would later become iconic, capturing not just two individuals but the embodiment of military values in action. The photograph would be shared countless times across social media and news outlets, becoming a symbol of what it means to honor and support veterans. As the formal ceremony concluded with the traditional playing of taps, Marcus and the elderly veteran stood together in respectful silence. The haunting melody created a moment of reflection for everyone present, but it held special meaning for the two soldiers who had demonstrated through their actions what military service was truly about. The music seemed to seal their bond, connecting them to all those who had served and sacrificed throughout history. When the final notes faded away and people began to disperse, Marcus helped the veteran return to his seated position with the same careful attention he had shown throughout their time standing together. The elderly man gripped Marcus's hand firmly as he settled back into his chair, his eyes conveying gratitude that words could not adequately express. Their partnership had lasted for the duration of the ceremony, but the impact would endure far longer. The veteran's daughter approached Marcus with tears in her eyes, explaining that her father had been worried about attending the ceremony because of his mobility issues. She said that Marcus's assistance had allowed her father to participate fully and maintain his dignity, which meant more to their family than any formal recognition could. Her words helped Marcus understand the broader significance of his actions and the difference that small acts of kindness could make in people's lives. As people began leaving the ceremony area, many stopped to thank Marcus personally. Veterans from different generations and conflicts expressed their appreciation for his demonstration of military values. Parents told him that his actions had provided a powerful example for their children about service and compassion. The positive feedback confirmed that Marcus had made the right choice in prioritizing human need over ceremonial protocol. The story of Marcus and the elderly veteran quickly spread beyond the ceremony itself. Local news stations featured the story that evening, and national outlets picked it up within days. Social media posts about the interaction were shared thousands of times, often accompanied by personal stories from other veterans and their families. The simple act of helping someone stand had become a catalyst for broader conversations about how society should treat and honor its veterans. Military leadership took notice of the positive attention Marcus's actions had generated. Rather than facing disciplinary action for breaking protocol, he was commended for demonstrating the values that the Royal Guard was meant to embody. His superiors recognized that his decision to help a fellow veteran had enhanced rather than diminished the dignity of the ceremony and the reputation of his unit. The elderly veteran himself became something of a local celebrity, with people wanting to hear his stories and learn about his military service. The attention brought him renewed purpose and energy, connecting him with community members who were inspired by his example and grateful for his service. The assistance Marcus had provided had opened doors to new relationships and opportunities for the veteran to share his experiences with younger generations. Marcus returned to his regular duties with a deeper understanding of what military service meant. The experience had taught him that true honor sometimes required thinking beyond rules and regulations to focus on human needs and dignity. He carried the memory of standing with the elderly veteran as a reminder of the values that should guide all military actions, both on ceremonial occasions and in everyday interactions. The friendship between Marcus and the elderly veteran continued long after the ceremony ended. They met regularly for coffee, sharing stories about their respective military experiences and discussing the changes they had witnessed in military culture over the decades. Their relationship bridged generational gaps and provided both men with valuable perspectives on service, sacrifice, and the bonds that unite those who have worn the uniform. Years later, when people recalled the veterans' recognition ceremony, they remembered not the formal speeches or official presentations, but the moment when a young Royal Guard helped an elderly veteran stand proud. The image of the two soldiers supporting each other had become a lasting symbol of military brotherhood and the timeless values that connect all those who choose to serve their country. Marcus's decision to break protocol had created a legacy that would inspire others to prioritize compassion over convention whenever the opportunity arose to help a fellow human being in need.